Good morning. This is the Hershenson podcast. I'm Zach Hershenson, the host of the Hershenson podcast, and I'm here talking with my colleague Rob Fulton, who recently was one of the lawyers representing Aaron Wood in her trial against the estate of Robertson, which was a very successful verdict that was obtained about 19 days ago on February 3rd. A King County jury awarded general damages in the form of $2.7 million. So, Rob, thanks for joining us today. We're here to get some of your thoughts on things with regard to your role in that trial.
Sure, no problem.
Rob, first question is, why don't you tell us what it is, what precisely your role was in the trial?
My role was to carry our theme for the trial and to handle the majority of the lay witnesses, preparing them for their testimony and weaving their stories into Aaron's story. End of the day, it was to highlight and support Aaron's direct testimony and to bring Aaron to life for the jury.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you got to know the uh, the lay witnesses?
Yeah, well, initially, I came into this case. It was already going, so lead counsel Joe Pipinich had a few conversations with the lay witnesses, and so usually there's a handoff, and so we had set up times to introduce me to the witnesses, and then had a chance to get to know them just a little bit, and then I scheduled times to meet with them just one on one. And so most of this was done via either the phone or um, um, through video. But in the best circle, I'll take that back. A few were done in person, um, that's the process: setting up a time, transferring the witness, and then beginning to build your own relationship with each witness.
And did you do anything that was unique with regard to this trial as compared with previous trials that you've been involved in?
Well, I don't know if it's unique, but if I know that I'm going to have, um, several witnesses, what I don't want to duplicate testimony, and which could possibly get called for an objection, cumulative. And so, what I like to do is I kind of like to have a collage of each witness and their strengths, what they're going to speak to, and then have them all set out in one area so I can look at them. And then I can look at it and see where I want the strongest testimony or the facts from that witness to make sure that that comes out, and then to build it that way, and then to give each witness at least three strong points that I want to make sure I get out of them each time I put them up on the stand. And so, end of the day, all these points have been covered through all the witnesses, and so that's how I like to go about doing it. So I wouldn't say it's unique. The more witnesses you have, you just have to be careful, like I said, of not having duplicative testimony. But outside of that, it's making sure that all points in Aaron's story is being also told by are mirrored by these witnesses.
I have heard some lawyers say something to the effect of, well, I don't want to ask every single question of the witness before they testify at trial, because I'd like them to have something to say, or, you know, that there's some spontaneity in terms of the testimony that they're gonna give. And then, you know, I certainly have, either heard this, or I'm receptive to the idea that you ought to hear pretty much everything they're gonna say and then choreograph the testimony, you know, to the degree that it's possible before they actually do get up there and testify. Do you have an approach, just keeping in mind those two sort of, at least theoretical propositions there, or different approaches? Do you understand? The first question would be,
Yeah,
you got an
yeah, I understand what you're saying. So, yeah, I think the goal, as with all your witnesses, um, you want them to tell the truth. And so, um, there are better ways of telling the truth than other ways. And so, what I like to do is after several conversations with the witnesses, to get them to feel comfortable just talking, and so that they're not nervous. But end of the day, um, there's I provide each witness with bullet points, and so it's not so much as what to say, but to remind them that these are areas I'd like them to talk about. And so it's easier for someone to have a frame of mind. And if you go, I think the best way to go is chronological order, after you set a background for that witness, and then you just take them through when they've met, in this instance, Erin Wood. Tell me about, when you met her, what was it like? What were your first impressions? And moving them through and help them, almost walk them through the areas you want them to cover, but they're going to say it in their own words, because I never want to be caught in a situation where they're trying to memorize a script, or that's not it. I want them to be comfortable and just having a conversation with me as we go through these points. And so I provide them with an outline of the points that I like to talk about with them, but not necessarily the words I want them to use.
Do you feel like, in the context where we were presenting this evidence at trial, these are recipient witnesses, but discovery's closed, so they're not going to get, they're not going to get too much questioning when it comes to whatever it is that you discuss with them, right? I mean, they're not going to. Is that something that you at least kind of contemplate when you're preparing those witnesses?
Definitely. I mean, obviously, in this case, in Miss Wood's case, um, these witnesses had not been deposed prior, and so really, it was a clean slate. Um, and so I didn't have to prepare them for, okay, now before you took a deposition, we need to make sure you understand what you said in that deposition, and it can't be contrary to that. But at the same time, you don't have to have it word for word. So that kind of removes that element from that, and so you don't have to worry about them thinking, oh gosh, I can't remember if I said this before, or what have you. So um, those preparing witnesses that have already been deposed, then that's a different matter, and that takes more time, more meetings, and walking through and getting them comfortable dealing with these things. But end of the day, um, if a witness knows, number one, I told the truth to begin with, I'm going to tell the truth again, and there's not this I'm going to catch you because you missed a word mentality. And that doesn't work anyway. So, but yeah, so you definitely it would change, and there'd be a little bit more nuance if they had been deposed before. But in this instance, we didn't have to deal with that.
And you, not being in there for most of the testimony, can you maybe just summarize the different witnesses and what they each respectively kind of brought in terms of, or why don't you start out with what they ended up bringing to the
Yeah.
cage,
Well,
one by one, kind of going through
yeah,
it.
sure. Um, in general, or what we wanted the witnesses to speak to, and to highlight and to illustrate was Aaron's loss of community, and she basically had two communities that she was a part of, and based on the crash and the injuries that almost isolated her or removed her from having that full enjoyment from that. And first one was dealing with cross training. There was a cross training community that she was involved in. She was very um, athletic. She did a lot of things in the CrossFit community. And so one of the key witnesses spoke about what it was like and what it took to be a part of the CrossFit community and why she was a part of it, and how losing that sense of bonding and relationship was huge. And then the other key component was the horse community. And so, and we talked earlier in the previous podcast about a farrier, and a farrier obviously takes care of the horse's feet, their hooves, and it's everybody everybody in a horse community understands the importance of a farrier. And if the phrase is no hoof, no horse, and it predominates everything that the horse community understands and they know. And so immediately there's a connection. And so dealing with a good farrier or dealing with a bad farrier, that comes out immediately. And so painting the picture of the importance of what she did and how good she was at it, and losing the ability to do that was huge. But not only that, was the horse community of itself is one that is accepting of everyone who loves horses. So it doesn't matter who you are, and what you look like, it doesn't matter. And so this competing narrative that the defense wanted to throw out there was how Aaron was, she was morbidly obese, that she was this and she was not, she was this outcast, which was far from the truth. There was nothing like that. And so helping these witnesses to speak about that community, the bonding, the acceptance, all those things were key components. And so those were the two main issues with the witnesses. And there were a couple, I guess, like separately from that, or a sub part of that, I should say, is that you have people that you obviously are your clients, but you also have your close friends. And so a part of this too was whether they were clients or friends, the bond between helping a horse, wanting to help a horse, helping others um, uh, feel that they can deal with their horses. All that came through all these witnesses, and so it showed Aaron's love for horses, the bond that was broken when she couldn't be with her horses, and yeah, so that was primarily what we were trying and what I was trying to do with these witnesses.
Um, so one of the things that occurred to me, actually, just the things that I saw with regard to lay witnesses, I saw the first woman
Vivian,
been a dress, I think dressage, is that the correct
dressage.
dressage?
Yeah.
She was a dressage champion.
Hmm.
That's like sort of like a just showing how well trained the horses are, sort of like you're taking them through like a course.
Yeah, well, yeah, dressage is it's an Olympic event. It's comes derives from a French term, but it's yeah. So these horses are just amazing. They the um they go through a series of techniques and movements and different ways that the horses their gait and all of these different things. So it's a very technical and uh,
Mhm.
very a very interesting event. But the type of people that get into dressage, they just are hyper sensitive about their horses, and it's like, eh,
Yeah.
and so it made it. She was very knowledgeable. The first witness had, and set up for us again this idea that you a farrier, you're not going to bring in somebody that you don't trust, that doesn't understand horses, that doesn't work well with people and the horse, and all those check box. She checked off all those things, and she lended credibility and all
Yeah.
these different
What
things,
was the
and so that was
what was the name?
wonderful.
What was her name again?
Her name was Vivian.
Well, so, one of the things that was interesting with her is that you have this sort of dynamic uh with a plaintiff where uh, if you you know if you can castigate the plaintiff as being sort of low class, right? Sort of disassociate the person from the jury, right? Make them seem like they're not somebody like, quote, like you, right? But I thought that, my impression of this Vivian woman was she was sort of somebody who's got money. Like that was kind of my impression. I think she was some kind of executive or something like that. That was my impression. But, and then she'd, of course, had this accolade of winning some kind of dressage contest. Am I right about that? I think she was like,
Yeah, I mean, she didn't. She wasn't an Olympic champion, but she did
right.
do. She had won events, and to that point, though, I mean, she said, this is. If I wanted to be I would have loved to have been an Olympian and compete, but I didn't have the money to do that.
Oh, okay. Because my impression, well, the
So,
reason I bring that up is because I just felt like she kind of lended a lot of credibility to Aaron, right? Like I
well,
think
yeah,
that was
and I,
maybe I'm using the wrong, maybe I misjudged things, but she seemed to me like my impression was this was somebody who was really serious about what she did. She'd taken it to this higher level. She had her act together, and she was saying that Aaron was really good at what she did. And see, I think the reason I think it's important is because Aaron didn't make any money at what she did, right? And a lot of people equate success in whatever it
mhm,
is that you do with how
mhm,
much money you make at the job, right? Whatever it is, or how much in a conventional professional sense, right? And I think there are actually people are are who are farriers who at least I met one guy who he told me he made basically a lot of money doing it. I don't know if he was lying about it or whatever. But I think if you were really industrious and it's kind of one of those things where if you're really industrious, you've got your kind of system set up. You had like a lot of, if you were really efficient, you had a lot of clients and you ran like a business. I mean, like it's not
right, yeah,
intrinsically a poorly paid thing. So to
right,
me, and we weren't making a wage claim. So to me, it was like, you got to kind of, because she lost this thing, right? And she lost something that we weren't going to place any actual financial value on it. There wasn't a lost wage claim. She clearly had a lost wage claim. So it seems to me that it was really important to to establish that she was good at that job, right? Like, and she was doing it, and a lot of other people thought she was good at it. She was a high level professional. To me, that was important, and that was what I saw this Vivian woman really establishing for the trial. Because I think if you're gonna look, I think the value of
yeah,
losing out on your profession, if you're not going to put a number on it, you've got to establish that the person was good at it, right? And that they're not just some dilettante
yeah,
who was
and
saying, you know what I mean?
yeah, and I'll add. I mean, I'll add this. It see that the whole Aaron's whole story was she gave up, you know, um, other things that she could have done to do something that she believed she was born to
You mean
do.
the welding and so forth?
Correct. Um, and she was making good money at welding. Um, and she said, but that's not me. What I want to do, and what I believe I was created to do, was to work with horses. And so what Vivian established was not necessarily, yes, that she was proficient, she was excellent, but she loved horses.
Yeah.
And that's what drew Vivian to her, because Vivian said, look, I had, for example, here's the, one of the, I think, a very strong, um, piece of her testimony was, I put out an ad, I needed to get this horse over to Eastern Washington. And again, back to Vivian, she didn't have the money to to do this herself. She needed help. And immediately she gets a response from Aaron. Aaron and her dad said, sure, we'll take it. We'll just give us some gas money, and that's all we need. We'll take him. We'll take the horse. And so they drove Vivian, Aaron Wood and her dad, this sick horse that needed to get to Washington, to Eastern Washington. They they volunteered.
Yeah.
And so again, it was, not only was she excellent at her job, she loves horses, number
Yeah.
one, and she doesn't want to see horses hurt, or and that carried through the entire theme of the trial.
Let me ask you this. So we had a trial you and I did a couple years ago now. The Garbani case, obviously a mildly different outcome. But there was, I think, there's this thing where I can't remember where I heard it, but it's the phrase is interesting but not important, right? And so like there is a part of like so okay, so I actually think, for example, in Garbani's case, he had I thought it was a very compelling actual story in the sense that like he really did have these problems. I thought we illustrated it fairly well. But, you know, being a copy machine repairman and struggling at getting back to being a copy machine repairman. I mean, if you're going to write a movie or a screenplay, right? It would not be about how you had to struggle to get back to being a copy machine repairman. It's like just about the most boring subject matter. Um, Most people don't even think about copy machine repairing, or if they do, it's right. It's like, but
Right.
like, so when I'm there are a lot of things, but so I think like, I'm not saying it's not important that someone takes care of horses, but in the grand scheme of things, it's just as important to be taking care of horses as it is to be taking care of copy machines. It's just not that interesting, right? So it's like interesting but not important. The actual subject matter of her life, this horse thing, I think this is my opinion. I think the fact that the case was about somebody who lost this sort of subject matter, this thing that is itself an interesting, dynamic, engaging subject matter, really added to the actual case. Setting aside the sort of practical aspects of the trial being perhaps presented more in a more compelling manner, I do think the actual subject matter being interesting like that added quite a bit. Could you comment on that in the context of what the way in which the witnesses were presented?
Um, yeah, and I think again, it's you know, um, the jury. Maybe there was one person who had any involvement with horses before, so the jury doesn't understand and doesn't have necessarily a connection to horses, and so um, the goal is to make whatever the loss is, you know, and it isn't so much she can't work again, and that what the work is that's not the goal. The goal is to help them understand, in their own life, what is it that if that was taken away from you and you couldn't do it anymore,
Right.
what would you do?
Yeah.
And how would that make you feel? Right. And so that's that's the piece. And it's like, if that's communicated correctly and you're able to do that,
Yeah.
then you take it to that third level that Joe was talking about, in our first session here, about this isn't about the injury.
Yeah.
It's not about it's about, you now have taken something that this person, and what that may be for you, you can't do it anymore. And it's a permanent thing, and it's only going to get worse.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's the point where, yes, a horse story versus a computer repairman or a copy repairman.
See,
But there's some.
even though we did the trial, you've already forgotten what he did for a living. So
No, 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 no. I did.
he was canon
That's right.
certified, Rob.
To
You
some
remember how
people,
many times he was canon certified? Because I can tell you.
I bet you could. But those are points that the jury doesn't want to know either.
Well, look, I do think, like, just to recap, because there was the things that he talked about, I think were really helpful. The way he iterated that. One was what is mechanically wrong with the person. Two is what is the limitation and how does it affect the things that they do? Those are the two sort of pragmatic things. And the third one, what is universal about that activity that gives a person hope, drive, and interest in life? What has happened as a result of it? Shame, isolation, lack of independence.
Hmm.
Those are the three. The third being right. No, I think I just setting aside. I think that our case failed because Judge McCullough, another example of one of the things I felt about judges was that, right? But like Judge McCullough basically dismissed our case. So I don't know that we didn't do that. I thought we hit that stuff. I thought we did a pretty good job of hitting that stuff. I don't think we did a good. I think the thing we didn't do a great job of was the mechanical aspects of it, and that would be where I would go if we would have gotten that case back from the Court of Appeals. I think we should have again. We should have. But if we had, that would be what I would have done. I would have focused on the mechanical. But I think I do think if you're gonna try and make because we didn't make a wage claim in Garbani, right? But if you're gonna make a claim in Garbani, it would have rang a little hollow if you were to sort of impose this. Let's just analogize the horse to a copy machine, right? I mean, it's not really plausible to express a love for copy machines that you could say the same about horses, right? I mean, horses are different from copy machines in that really regard. In other words, like, and I'm trying to make a joke out of it, but I think it's an important difference to say, like, look, let's just say hypothetically that Ray was able to find a job doing something that was, I don't know. I mean, like, let's say he was able to find a job where he was, I don't know, doing customer service, say on the phone, talking to people about such and such, and he was making the same amount of money as he was as a copy machine repairman. I think you'd have a hard pitch to say that this loss of being, and he'd done that for 30 years. He clearly loved doing it or liked doing it or endured it, right? But I think a lot of jobs where you replicate the earnings, um, you're going to have a hard time saying, well, he lost out on that job. Even if it's something like, I think about these ferry guys, if you're working as a ferry guy for whatever reason, you're working on a vessel, and you can't work on a ferry. Let's just say you got seasick. That was you had to work in a different job as a service mechanic, right? How are you going to say, well, I love being out on the water, right? Is that really worth $2.7 million in general damages? No, I don't think so. I think you
Yeah.
had to
And
have that horse there to make that.
yeah, and so if you didn't have the horse, it would, right? So what was the main issues with like in the Garbani case, his, he had emotional, he
Yeah,
couldn't relate to his family the way he used to,
yeah,
right? That's the point. And so those are the things that we may have been able to present in a more dynamic way or provide a, a better picture for the jury to see that loss. It isn't the loss of that, he can't go, he has to go get another job and he's doing these things, but his brain injury caused his inability to relate and his temper and it put a wedge between him and his family. And that's the point that, either the jury didn't get it, they didn't see that, or they were too focused on the proximate cause, which in this instance
mhm,
is kind of our issue. So
yeah.
we didn't have to worry about proximate cause. I mean, that wasn't clouding the jury's understanding of what was going on. I think they immediately got it. Boom.
You mean like
High,
because he had that really dialed, because Joe really dialed in
yeah,
the
yeah.
causation. You
And
know,
that's
I 100% agree, and I think that's a huge lesson for us. Is and granted, there are reasons that that case was positioned to where it was, and of course
right,
we were
right.
tremendously crippled by the fact that the treating physician died of COVID.
Yes, exactly.
That really made it difficult, and of course the fact that I mean we were really, I mean, like the ruling, it wasn't just the ruling, right? It was the fact that, it was all based on something that wasn't actually there. That's the thing that really bothered me the most about that situation. And I'm not, I think we wouldn't maybe move for mistrial, but, I do think we can look back on it and say, these were the things we did right. These are the things we did wrong. Um, and I think you're right. I think it basically failed on, I think it failed on one and two, right? And I think if you can get liability worked out on in terms of the, if a lot of times our cases liability is kind of, zipped up. That should be if we're going to trial, or right. But that's really, I mean, maybe if you have one, two, you have one, two, three, right? I think that you make sure you get liability, call that one. Two, what's mechanically wrong with the person? Really zip that in, right? Two, three, what is the limitation and how does it affect the things they do? And then you can get into what's universal. I think a lot of that stuff I thought we did really well. I thought we really got him to open up. I think a lot of I think the we didn't have anybody who wasn't a family member, but I think you
Yeah,
needed that, and you needed to have non-family members in the Wood case, because she didn't really have her own family per se. She was kind of she's single, and this was her family, which in a way it kind of turned
correct.
it
That's
really,
right.
I think it really, amplified the loss, because this was really her. Those were the relationships that were most
Right.
preeminent in her life. I
Yeah,
think
I would
that's.
agree.
I'm not sure. Do you think any of the you knew the jurors, what their stories were? There were a lot of. Do you remember whether the jury was mostly married or single, or were there many
Um,
single people? And I
I'm
know there's a
trying.
lot more people staying single and throughout their life these days. That's not one of those situations.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back through some of the demographics on that, and maybe 50-50. I mean,
Right. Oh,
I
okay. That high, huh?
yeah, I think yeah, yeah, I would have to look at that. Um, again, but I thought there were about, half of them were married or had been married. Um, and I'm trying to, in my mind, I'm thinking of the single folks on there that, yeah, yeah, maybe, yeah, maybe uh,
More
more
single
people
people?
were married.
Oh,
No,
more
no,
people
more,
married.
more married people, I think,
Yeah.
I think,
Well, I
yeah,
think that's a big difference. I think that's something I've noticed in my own life. You're single. When you're single, your friend group And maybe that changes as your kids get a little older. I
Right.
think I think when you're married, you know, especially when you have kids, you're much more, you're much more focused on that. And then, you know, when you're single, your friend group is maybe more important. I think it's, yeah, that made that dynamic, I think, pretty pronounced in her case, right? Was that she had
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
kind of become her family, and
It
she
was her
talked
film.
about
Yeah. And even if we had, even with the single folks, I mean, most people have an understanding of family, however that is created or um, constituted, I should say, for them, because they have a connection to something that has meaning to them, and whatever that is, and that was her loss. She lost the connection to the things that meant most to her, and I'll go back to the um, you know when we polled the jury, or one jurist decided to stay and talk to us, and it was very helpful. But what he said was, you know, I don't know anything about horses, but he said, what I do know is if someone said, or if I lost the ability to play the guitar, I don't know what I would have done.
that.
I don't know what I would do, right? And so that's that universal piece where it's like, okay, whatever it is in my life that I'm attached to, and I draw meaning from it, and I hold dear to me, if that's removed from me, uh, well, how much does that cost? I mean, what's the value to that? And so I think that, got across to people of, you know, what would you pay or agree to accept in payment to take away the thing that you love the most in your life? And you know, uh, that's what they got it, right? Now, it was different levels of what they believe the cost should be. This jury thought it should be 7.5 million. That's how deeply it felt for him. Others have a connection, but not as deep as a connection, and so they were probably lower down the line in what they thought. Okay, well, that has that much value. But I think that's what got through. We were able to communicate that to the jury.
Maybe if you could, I think you've summarized it pretty well right there, but we're getting close to the hour here. If you could just give your top, you know, what's your takeaway from the trial? What if you could say in a few words, what you came out of it with, both personally and professionally, so that we could end this podcast on your thoughts on it? That would be great.
Okay. Yeah, well, I would say two things. Um, um, or maybe three. um, uh, when you have a witness that is truthful and is not afraid of of being able to share both the good and the bad of their life, um, that's believable, and people appreciate that because um, no one's perfect, and that's a universal truth. No one, everyone knows I'm not perfect. That was definitely communicated, and that was and was received by the jury. And then number two is um, the jury makes a decision first on feeling, and then they'll look and they'll apply their logic to it. And so I believe again that loss of community, loss of the ability to be connected to family was what drove the jury's decision, and they understood it. And on different levels, people have lost or would be fearful of losing being connected to community. And so those are the, and then I guess the third thing is is making sure that you have a story that is that is told and supported by all your witnesses.
Mhm.
And those are the three things.
Well, Rob, thanks so much for joining us today. I think this is a good bookend to what we talked about yesterday or last week. And hopefully we can do this after every trial. I know we've got a couple of trials coming up. And hopefully it'll be both cathartic from a professional standpoint and also on an emotional level. I know you put a lot into this, so really appreciate that.